Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be taking an in-depth look at the face and subject tracking capabilities of the new DJI Osmo Pocket 3. We're going to look at the different modes and settings and how best to set it up, but we'll also take a look at some of the limitations of the tracking system. We'll also take a look at some of the limitations of the tracking system. Then we'll take a look at some common filming examples to see where you might want to try to use the tracking capabilities, and we'll see how well the DJI Pocket 3 performs. All this coming up. So this is a follow-up to a video I recently posted in which I compared the DJI Pocket 2 to the newly released DJI Osmo Pocket 3. Now, I've owned the Pocket 2 now for a couple of years and I've made a lot of use out of it, but there's one feature that I really have never used, and that is the tracking feature. And that's really for two main reasons. Number one, I found that it really didn't work that well. If you check out some of my earlier videos, you'll see some examples where I tested it out and it had a tendency to lose the subject pretty easily. The second reason that I really didn't use it much was the fact that it could not function in 4K, so it would only work up to resolutions of 1080p, and I really preferred to film in 4K. But now we have the DJI Pocket 3, which has a tracking system that is 3 years and 3 generations more advanced than the Pocket 2. So on the Pocket 3 we now have Active Track 6 versus the Active Track 3 on the Pocket 2. And based on some initial testing that I've done, it really looks to be a far more capable system, and it works in 4K resolution, even 4K at 60 frames per second. So in today's video, what I want to do is take an in-depth look at the tracking functionality on the Pocket 3. We're going to look at the different tracking modes, some of the settings and how to set it up. Also, we're going to look at some of the limitations of tracking that you need to be aware of. And then we'll look at some examples of how you might want to use the tracking capability. Now, there's a lot to cover, so I'll place the chapters up here, so if you want, you can skip straight to the section or sections that you are interested in, and those same chapters should also appear on the video timeline. And before we get started, the usual disclaimer. This video is not sponsored or paid for in any way. I purchased all of the equipment with my own money, and the opinions are entirely my own. Also, if you are enjoying today's video, if you're finding it useful, please remember to give us a thumbs up and also consider subscribing to the channel. Also, if you have any comments, questions, input, suggestions for future videos, please also add those into the comments section. I love to hear from you guys. So let's get on with it. Okay, so when it comes to tracking, you can basically track anything on the DJI Pocket 3. You can track a face, you can track your pet, you can track a vehicle, you can track pretty much anything that can be distinguished from its background, and we'll get onto that in more detail later on. So there are different ways of enabling tracking on the Pocket 3, and we'll start with the most basic. So anytime you are shooting standard video, what you can do, and you can do this either through the app as I'm using here, or you can do it on the screen just slightly differently. And I'll share my screen so you can see exactly the same thing that I'm looking at here. What I'm going to do, as you can see right now, it is not tracking me. So what I'm going to do is simply define a box around what I want to track. And as you can see, it has now prioritized my face, and it is now tracking me based on my face. You'll see the little green box now around my face as it follows me around. And if I want to disable it, you'll notice there's a little X right on the top corner, and now I have disabled tracking again. Now there is also an automated way of enabling face tracking. Now in the settings, you'll find this function called FT Selfie. Now whenever that is turned on and you switch the gimbal camera to the front-facing camera, and when the FT Selfie mode is enabled, as you can see, it immediately found my face and started tracking me just like before. Now if I'm using the screen, I can simply tap anywhere on the screen outside of the tracking area and it will disable tracking. And in order to enable tracking on the screen, I simply double tap on the screen, and as you can see, it's now tracking me just like it was previously in the app. Now with the FT Selfie mode, you don't have to switch the camera from front to back necessarily. You can also just double click to recenter, and it will also reacquire a face if it finds one in the screen. Now you can also enable tracking mode by going into this smart menu here, and the first one, as you can see, is called Face Auto Detect. And what this does is allows you to start recording, and then as somebody moves into the frame, it will automatically pick up their face and begin tracking them. So it's not tracking from the beginning. So I'm going to start that one, and it tells me here that it will follow a face once recording starts. And let's start the recording. Okay, and now what I'll do is enter the frame. And as you can see, as I enter the frame, it now locates my face and begins tracking me. Now there is another mode of tracking that is called dynamic framing, and that's also accessed through these special features over here. So in this case, I'm going to choose dynamic framing and hit start. And here, what it does is it's going to show me a number of targets. So you can see there is a 3x3 grid here. So what this does is it allows me to place my target. Let's say I want my target to be in this portion of the frame. So I then place that target over my subject, which in this case is myself. And now you can see once again the tracking is turned on, but now instead of keeping my face in the middle of the frame, it is now placing it over on the side of the frames. Now if I want to change the position of my target, I can simply just at any point re-enable the joystick. Let's say I want to be in this bottom third here, place myself down here, and now the camera will follow me around, keeping me in the lower left side of the image. Okay, so there is one other setting that can be used in conjunction with the tracking, and that is the gimbal rotation speed. And you'll find it right here in the menu. Now this gives you the option to change the default to a slow speed, so if you want the gimbal head to track your subject slowly, or if you have a fast-moving subject that you want to be able to track as quickly as possible, then you can place it to the fast speed. Okay, let's talk about the limitations of subject tracking on the DJI Pocket 3. And when I talk about limitations, I'm not trying to imply anything negative here. I just think that in the interest of thoroughness, it's important to consider what is possible and what's not possible when it comes to the tracking capabilities. Now, as I said earlier, tracking is available anytime you're in the standard video recording mode. So it will support all resolutions up to and including 4K, and it will even work up to 60 frames per second. So that means tracking is not available when you are using slow motion mode, when you're using the low light mode, and also when you're using a time-lapse mode, but I wouldn't really expect it to be available there anyway. Now, as far as the slow motion mode is concerned, it's understandable here. You're dealing with frame rates of 120 frames per second or higher. And as you can imagine, it's going to be very difficult to track a subject at those kind of frame rates. But if anyone from DJI is listening, it would really be cool to be able to track a subject and autofocus on a subject even in slow motion mode. And as far as the low light mode is concerned, although you cannot use tracking in the low light mode, even in standard video mode, I think you'll find the Pocket 3 has really good low light performance, and in standard video mode, of course, you can use tracking. Obviously, it's going to be more challenging for the Pocket 3 to keep track of your subject if it's very dark, but again, it is available as long as you're in standard video mode. Now, the other important thing to talk about when it comes to limitations is the range of motion on the gimbal head itself. So, apologies if I'm stating the obvious here, but each of the three axes on the gimbal head, so you have the pan axis here, side to side, you have the tilt axis here, up and down, and then you also have the roll axis for horizon leveling. So each of these three axes has a limited range of motion. So if you are tracking a subject and your subject moves beyond the range of motion, then obviously the camera will no longer be able to track them. And you saw an example of exactly that happening during the introduction to this video. Now, fortunately, I will say in my experience, the DJI does a really good job of reacquiring the subjects once they come back into the frame, but of course we'd rather not lose them in the first place. So normally when you're operating the camera, either holding it by hand or have it mounted such as here, it is in an upright position, and in this position it's going to be the pan motor which really takes on the bulk of your subject tracking. Fortunately, as you can see, the pan motor has a pretty broad range of movement. It covers about 300 degrees, going from about 60 degrees to the left when looking at it from the front, and it will go all the way around, facing the back, and about another 60 degrees again over towards the left. So you really just have a small area on the left-hand side of the camera where you should avoid placing your subject so you won't experience any problems with tracking. Now, the tilt motor will also play a role in subject tracking. It will tilt upwards beyond 90 degrees. It will actually go to 120 degrees, so slightly pointing back in this case. And it will go down to 70 degrees below the horizontal. So again, it has a pretty broad range of movement. Now, the third motor, the roll motor, really won't have a lot to do with subject tracking, at least as long as it's in this vertical orientation. And it has a range of motion of 45 degrees in each direction. Now, all of that applies as long as you have the camera in this vertical upright orientation. But there may also be times when you want to have the camera horizontal. For example, you may want to get very low to the ground to track a small animal. Or if you're out and about and you don't have a tripod, instead of hoping that your camera will stay upright, laying the camera down provides for a much more stable platform. But importantly now, when it's in a horizontal configuration, it's now the roll motor which takes care of panning, which, as we said before, only has a plus-minus 45 degree range of motion. So if your camera is horizontal, you will not have the same range of motion when it comes to tracking your subject. So here's one example of where you might want to use the tracking capabilities. Let's say you are demonstrating something, like you are cooking something and you want to demonstrate to your audience how you are doing it. Now, right now I have the tracking set to the standard face tracking. So my face is in the middle of the frame more or less, and it might not be as clear as to what I'm doing down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the dynamic framing to move my face a little bit more to the top of the frame so you can see more of what's going on down here. Now you have to do that on the camera itself, so I'll come and do that now. So this is the same scene, but now I have the dynamic tracking enabled, so my face is closer to the top of the frame. And obviously this gives you a better view as I move around my workstation here and I show you the different things that I'm doing on my workstation here. So this is one good example where you might want to use the dynamic framing. The other setting that I have is I have the tracking rotation speed set to slow. So now when I move around, the camera just slowly follows me around instead of in a rapid motion. Here's another good example of when to use the dynamic framing. Let's say you're tracking a subject taking a walk through a forest, a city, or other place of interest. By placing the subject to the side of the frame, you can draw more attention to the surrounding area, while also enhancing the sense of motion. Okay, so let's try tracking a fast-moving subject. Now, before we get started on this one, here's an interesting tip. Let's say you're trying to track something using the app, and it's just a little bit too small, and you get a message saying frame too small. What you can do is actually zoom in, and now you can see it's picked up my track, and I can zoom back out again. All right, so now let's have some fun to see how well this is going to work. Now, as I said earlier, you can track absolutely anything. It doesn't have to be a face, a person, a pet, and it doesn't even have to be a moving subject. In this clip, I'm tracking the large tree in the center of the frame. And this allows me to walk around and capture my subject from different perspectives while the camera keeps my frame firmly locked onto my subject. And of course you could use tracking in this way to capture a statue, a building, a famous landmark, and so on. I think that using tracking in this way helps you to get more stable and more interesting footage when you're filming stationary objects. So that concludes our overview of the tracking capabilities of the DJI Osmo Pocket 3. Now, as I said earlier, when it comes to the older Pocket 2, I never really made much use of the tracking capabilities due to the limitations that they had. But it's clear that the Pocket 3 has far more sophisticated tracking capabilities, and I can definitely see myself making a lot more use of them. Now, that all being said, for this type of filming, a talking head type shot, I don't think the tracking adds to it. In fact, I think it actually makes it a little distracting when the camera moves around. So I'm going to go ahead and disable it and just go back to a static picture. Although I do use this from time to time just to get the framing right, and then I turn it off just as I did right now. So that concludes our video for today. I hope you enjoyed it and got good information out of it. Please remember to give us a like and also consider subscribing to the channel for a lot more videos on tech, travel, and leisure. If you have comments, questions, If you have any suggestion for ways that you have found to use the tracking capabilities or other capabilities of the Pocket 3, go ahead and place those into the comment section. I always love to hear from you guys. Otherwise, thank you again for watching.